All right, we're on to module 10, which is our second last module. And we'll see how we go with these. Um, the challenges are reasonably short this week, um, which I'm not going to cut off discussion or anything, but I have a feeling we're going to struggle to get a whole lot of conversation out of these. I should have had a bit of a think about it and redesigned them. Um, but we'll see how we go. So we're in the third, or the last week of therapeutic jurisprudence. We're looking at the ways in which um, courts have taken on more of a health approach um, rather than the restorative justice approach, which is still kind of in the justice field, but it's rejigging the way in which we see justice. Therapeutic jurisprudence is more solely in that area of looking at health services. Um, Although I don't know whether courts necessarily can get much advice from health services on organisation and administration because they're notoriously bad in terms of customer support and customer service. But we'll see how we go. And the two different ones we're looking at this time is family violence up first, and the second one's mental health courts. All right, so the first one's involving the Winnebago County Domestic Violence Courts or any similar. And the first question is, what do domestic violence courts look like? How is it different?
Well, that example, sorry, let me turn the camera. That example that you gave, Scott, the video was very different from what it's like here,
Hmm.
like, because it was overseas.
Yeah.
So in Queensland, they're closed courts. In other states, they're not closed. Um, like I said, a lot of differences to how we do stuff. And you wouldn't get people in to do that until, you went to hearing before you'd have people swearing evidence. But I believe in other states, I've had some magistrates say to me they've gone and watched other states and they're open courts and they see them and they seem to swear them, swear what they're going to say in at the start, not
Mhm.
at hearing. Where in Queensland you do it at hearing. If
And
that
what
makes
difference?
sense to you.
Yeah, what difference does that make, you think, in terms of the?
Well, it takes longer, I guess, to you put your stuff into writing, you do affidavits, you do all that kind of stuff. But I guess you can swear stuff right at the start. So to me, they must be not so not saying a long drawn out process, but not as many steps to the end
Mhm.
as we do if you're disputing, if you don't agree. That's
Yeah,
if you have to go to hearing because you don't agree. Yeah.
yeah,
So if you don't put something in your affidavit or do something or application, if you can swear it like they do and they can ask you, then you can say things where we can't. You have to file new, you know what I mean?
it has to be
Sorry. Yep.
formally part of the
Yes.
process
Mm.
and part
Are
of it.
family violence courts different to domestic violence courts?
That's the same thing.
Okay.
And like all these innovations, they're all different wherever you go. So there's no consensus on having to do it the same way.
The states call them different names, don't they? Because um, people come in wanting these orders from what we call domestic violence, but I think they're called something else. Are they restraining orders or something in other states? I think they have
Yeah.
different names from as things as well compared in each state.
Yeah, it's interesting as to what is the difference between, I mean, obviously they're used interchangeably a lot, but the difference between domestic violence and family violence, like why people see a need to distinguish between those.
Well, here
Like
in Townsville, we've got family court, and then we've got the magistrate, which deals with the domestic violence. So they're different here in Townsville. So family violence, would that go to family court, or would that go to the magistrate for the violence side?
Magistrates courts, family
Yeah.
courts, just dissolution of marriage and orders relating to children,
Mm.
custody of children. And as you can see, like that's an arbitrary cutoff um, in the system that doesn't always totally make sense with oh well, family court can't actually deal with the criminal violence side of things, but it has to be informed by that. So you'd be in a situation where you'd have to have the resolution of issues around family violence quite often before it then goes back to family court, I would think. Or maybe family court makes a provisional order and then revisits it once there's a determination.
You can vary a magistrate's court doing a DV order can vary a family court order
Okay.
in Queensland. I've never seen it done, but some in a court I've been in, but I know other courts have, they can do things like that. But I think a lot of family court is settled when the DVs are settled as well. Like they seem to run in hand. My personal opinion is they should run together and they should go off to the family court because most of them are associated with family court, but they don't deal with them because when the DVs are usually sorted, you usually then send to sort out a lot of the family court orders. But I was going to say the Act is the Domestic Violence and Family Protection Act, and that's probably where that's where the family comes in. The Act name is actually got family in it.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
I was going to say because you can take orders out against your sister, your mother, your brother, your cousin. Yeah.
Yeah. Historically, the term domestic violence was often minimized, particularly by police who said, oh, it's just a domestic. We don't get involved when it's a domestic. So I don't know whether family violence was a newer term that was introduced to try and get away from that, oh, it's just a domestic and it's nothing to do with us side of things.
I thought it was to do with now because you can have them with families. Like before, a long time ago, you didn't have your brothers and your sisters. I didn't think they had to be in a relationship, but I could be wrong. But
well, long time ago, they were just assault.
Yeah, and then when they sort of brought it in, it was, against if you're in a relationship sort of thing, and then they've brought in the family part.
So it's kind of one of these situations where, like, the history of the way it's evolved has actually shaped what it is rather than what it's needed. And I mean, thinking as a designer, it's like, well, why are these things shaped the way they are? Oh, it's because it's the way we made them historically, not what we need. And I can imagine a lot of frustration for people who are wanting to deal with like one issue, which is the violence in the family, the disposition of kids. Like it's one issue, but you're told, well, the family court have jurisdiction over this bit. Police have jurisdiction over this bit. Magistrates courts have jurisdiction over this bit. And hey, some places are talking about introducing a specialist court, which has jurisdiction over part of this, but not all of it. So,
and there is your DV specialist courts now. So your biggest centres have specialist courts, which I think is Townsville, Mount Isa, Cairns, Rocky's getting its own that actually set up for domestic violence, a different kind of way, and they're specialised, where they have the larger numbers rather than them being they're still part of the mag court, but you have a specialised, that's all they do. The specialised with the magistrate doing it rather than like here we'll have DVs in the morning and then we'll go into general court, call over, that sort of thing, the magistrate doing the whole lot.
And I guess we've got kind of like another distinction, which is the basis of liability, that the breach of whatever violence order, family violence order, domestic violence order, intervention order, or whatever, what you're being punished for is breaching the order. And in criminal court with assault, you're being punished for, or regulated, whatever you want to call it, for the actual assault. So from a legalistic perspective, these are quite distinct things, even though we're talking about the same actions. So again, it doesn't make much sense that like part of the family organization, whatever stuff might be dealt with by a family court. The violence aspect might be dealt with by another court. It might not be the magistrate's court. If it's severe enough violence, it might go to the district court or the county court here. And then the magistrate's court might deal with the family violence order, the breach of the order. So we've kind of labeled each of the bits and pieces of like what might be one attack into these different legal categories that different courts deal with. I mean, I can see why people are frustrated.
And your breaches are open court as well. So they're not closed court matters or anything like that, like the domestic violence application is, but anyone can be in for. So I'm assuming it's the other states because they have DV open, but in Queensland, your breaches are not a closed court matter. It doesn't mean you can report all of them, like name people if it's going to identify somebody. You can tell the details, but you can't report stuff that could identify a victim or survivor, that kind of stuff. But they're open, so you can sit in there listen, yeah. Which to me is weird because you can't have the DV application, but you can have your breaches. But I did hear something on TV saying that, or TV or somewhere maybe I read something that, they get crap all for breaches in Queensland.
Really?
Like our penalties for breaches.
I'll take up where she left off. But yes, here in Queensland, when someone breaches a DV, it's not considered a major thing because people go to court to get DV orders, or the police put DV orders on a couple, and they're not supposed to be within however many meters of each other, or they're not supposed to live together for a certain amount of time, and you turn around and they're back together. So when the people ring for a DV breach, it's really not, it's not taken as seriously as it should be, I suppose.
I think they did a thing I'd just seen, like they must got all the penalties, Scott, and did some sort of comparison or something on recent penalty. I mean, I get those things, the media thing at work all the time, but they must have done some things over the penalty, and I heard them say that they don't get, a lot, which is true. It's okay. You have to, it's. So they're saying the penalty's not, but I mean, on the other side of it is, do you want everyone, they said if they breach them, they should be in prison? Well, that's only going to fill up the prison. So there's two sides to everything.
And there are so many people who are in prison for not for what they've done, but for failure to pay fines. So you're likely to just push people into prison for default of payment of fines if you make the fines too large. I'm just looking it up now.
And on the other side of that is, the onus is on you to prove why you should get bail if you breach and things like that. But if you look at, then you start getting into the Bail Act, and the Bail Act says things like, if you've got to provide for your family and keep the mortgage or pay them the money so they, look after your kids and all that, they're factors for, circumstances for bail and stuff. So it's a bit, because that relates to a lot of those cases. So it's a sort of.
Yeah, and when you consider that money is a bigger source of stress in families, I mean, I'm not saying that all violence is caused by money or in poor families, but you can be like exacerbating the problems that are underlying.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah. So because they're things that reasons, what it is, it's under the section of the Bail Act.
So it's, in terms of imprisonment, the penalty is 3 years or 5 years. So it's the prison option's pretty high.
So your strangulation and all that kind of stuff goes up to the district court because you're meant to get more, right? Because the mag court can only do a couple of 3 years. So you're meant to get more. But if you go do the stats, which is what I was looking at this thing, they don't get what it is. And under this new coercive control and all those things, they are going to be in the High Court as well if it's serious enough so that you can get more time. You can even be deemed a serious offender, violent offender and stuff. But
yeah, because I think strangulation would be bodily harm, wouldn't it?
They just call it strangulation.
Is it a separate offence, is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a separate offence in Queensland, your strangulation.
Okay.
It's like came in a while ago. So, but the thing is, as I keep saying to people, there's appeals and all sorts of things, and we get case law, and then everyone below that is bound by that case law. So if some Court of Appeal says that was too much and he should only got 2 years after that, everyone is bound by it. And that's what I say to people. You don't, the magistrates and the judges, they're bound by a lot of case law.
Yeah, and there's also practice directions that come out that talk about, how much. I'm just looking up it's 120 penalty units, and that's like $160.
Mm-hmm.
So $20,000 for a first offence and 40 for a repeat breach.
Yeah, you're likely to get a couple $100 for a breach.
Yeah. And that's, with a lot of these problems, it's the same problems we see throughout the justice system. That we know that a period in prison is not going to necessarily fix what someone's doing. And a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford to pay the fine, so they're going to end up in prison anyway, if they default payment. So,
And in
um,
prison, you don't get a necessarily rehabilitations. You have to be so long and everything, serving so long, or have a full-time sentence and stuff to access a lot of rehabilitation programs. So if they go to prison, they don't have the chance to do those, men's or even women's rehabilitation programs and stuff.
and I think and I'll get back to like the integration of that into the Canadian, was it Canadian? Winnebago, maybe might be US. Um, maybe US. We'll look at that option in a sec. But you're really relying on deterrence here. You're relying on someone going, oh, if I breach, because remember, this is not a penalty for violence. It's not a penalty for actually doing anything except for breaching the order. So that's very much distinct. And if you commit violence, you've also got that as an additional thing. But this is just for breaching an order, for staying away from someone. I think the premise is that people will be deterred by the 3 to 5 years prison and the fine. But, all our studies of deterrence theory, as I'm sure you've looked at in crim theory, have shown that people, particularly when there are passionate crimes, where people are not thinking straight, that they're not deterred. I mean, obviously, some people get deterred, and we don't know who they are because they don't do anything. So,
I think especially when there are children involved. So you've got domestic violence orders in regards to children. They will have in there, when you communicate, you can only communicate when it's in regards to the children. Kids are sick today, change of pick up, drop off location, whatever, something specific to the children. So a breach would then be, hi, how are you today? That's got nothing to do with the children.
yeah.
And that goes for both parties. So some women can use the DV as a manipulation, can breach the ex-partner for something because he didn't give her what she wanted.
Yeah.
All these sorts of things. And I think that's why here it's not really considered a major thing for breaching DV orders.
And given that there's going to be an overlap in life quite often between these two people, the people, the Bondi and the person named whatever they're described in um the act as, um like there's going to be like accidental connections at times, and it's going to be then a question of whose perspective it is, because someone may, even if it is accidental, see it as being a sinister kind of stalking. Like, I turned up and he was there, like he's been following me, he knows I'm there. um and that's a matter of perspective. So it is a very crude tool that I guess we use as a very sort of blunt intervention to just kind of go, look, just we'll try to keep these people away from each other. Plus, we'll also give, and I know it doesn't work this way, the way it's supposed to, but it's supposed to give like a shortcut for contacting the police where there's danger. Like if you say there's someone outside my house, you're not going to get the police screaming around straight away and confronting them, because there's lots of reasons why there could be a person outside the house. They're not necessarily Michael Myers or something. But if it's someone who has an intervention order, then that's like a shortcut to be able to go, well, they've breached that order. We don't have to prove what they're doing and lurking outside the house is a bad thing or a dangerous thing. But I believe there are still problems with that. The turnaround times are still very, very slow.
Just related to that, I heard on the radio that an elderly gentleman died in his home because it took 4 hours for an ambulance to turn
Down
up.
here, yeah.
I heard that too. And I think Paul Murray was talking about it last night on Sky. I think I heard him going on about for 2 hours. They heard the person yelling for help, and then they stopped, and 4 hours later they turned up. It's terrible. But that's your state, Scott. Not that
Yes.
it's any better in Queensland. I don't think it's any better in Queensland, but
No. No. And I mean, this is why talking about the Friday class, why the Ambo storylines are present in Blighttown as well, is because there's like it seems to be problems with ambos everywhere, and a lot of it just seems to be they don't have enough of them, and for some reasons, state governments are really resistant to putting enough people on.
I think that on Paul Murray, when I watched it, it said the union said they had 50 ambulances off the road because they didn't have the staff to do it because they were either burnt out and that
Yeah,
kind of stuff. So they're
they're all on
unable
sick
to
leave.
work. Yeah, or couldn't work
Yeah,
because of burnout or just overtime or, that kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, it's a lot, isn't it?
and there could have been a flu through the organization. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, it's pretty bad if it's due to burnout, but you've got to have contingency plans for just if a bad flu hits your department and suddenly, you know, everyone's out with the flu. What do you do then? And there was no backup plan for that either. So yeah, this is all related in terms of like all the emergency first responding with fire, police, ambulance. Um, the delays are a real problem, and I think there's an interesting perspective we don't really talk about um, with family violence is the difference between hindsight and foresight when you look at an issue. Because usually spend, and it happens a lot with criminal justice, we spend a lot of time obsessing when something terrible's happened, like that incident in Camp Hill a few years ago. Um, I won't talk about I won't talk about the facts because there's no reason to, but it was a DV breach murder, um, multiple murder, um, and at that point, every single thing that happens becomes significant. Every time there was like some interaction before then, everyone becomes the armchair detective and goes, you know what? The police should have known that the time that he did that, that was a real red flag and a warning sign that it was all going to end really badly. But the problem is when you're dealing with time going forward, not backwards, you see these sort of warning signs all the time, and it is really hard. And I'm not defending
Find
the
in
police.
small towns as well, it depends on who the upstanding citizen in the relationship is considered,
Yeah,
because I think we had something similar here where I'm getting too mixed up. I think there was one in Brisbane where the dad ended up killing all of the children in the car.
that's the one in Camp Hill. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And then I think we had one up here where the car got run off the road. Like she was trying to flee and he chased her and ran off the road or something. So the fact that it takes so much for a victim to leave a situation, and then once they do, everybody is against them because the person that they left was the upstanding citizen, and I don't believe anything you said.
Hmm.
To then eventually finally get an order, and then for the upstanding person to breach that order, oh, he just wants to see his children, so many steps need to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And one of the most interesting things one of my mentors told me when I was like 17, and volunteering as a law student and volunteering in legal centers. And this person was a head of domestic violence um, lobbying organization in Queensland, is she said, don't expect the victims to be very nice. Like a lethal thing you can get into is in a situation where you start judging a victim because you start thinking, well, they're not very nice people. Like, and then you start making your own moral evaluations over who you think is in the wrong. Because, like, yeah, quite often people aren't very nice, and that doesn't mean that they don't deserve the full protection of the law. And that's always stayed with me. Um, there was a TV show a couple of years ago that had law students from Sydney University. So they're all like North Shore, private school kids going to work in a legal center, and you had them beforehand, and they're like, oh, well, I really feel that, sorry for the people who've been left behind by society and whatever, and it's all about the poverty and whatever. And as soon as they see their first criminal offender, they're just like in shock because they're like, this person's terrible. It's like, yeah, they are. It doesn't mean they did what they're accused of doing doesn't mean they're not don't deserve a proper defense. But it's that sheltered kind of, and that tendency we want victims of domestic violence to be these frail, wilting flowers who, never do anything wrong, are never aggressive. And then, you know, the men to be kind of evil and sinister and whatever, rather than actually looking at the behavior, locking in on what the behavior is that's the issue. So yeah, it's hard stuff, and you can see why, although it's not justified at all. Quite often, police will look at a situation and go, "Gosh, he really annoys me, and he's a decent bloke." So there's obviously like it's really unfair. He just wants to see his kids and whatever, and it's like yeah, and then he ends up killing her and the kids and himself. And a lot of nice guys do really screwed up things. So and yeah,
So there isn't all those red flags, and I'm not going to mention certain cases, but I know that there was not red flags in some of those. He's adamant there was no red flags, and then people still killed people and kids and stuff. But there's definitely no, nothing that would make them think that anybody would even close to doing that.
Except for like if you go looking for red flags with hindsight and you go, oh, he posted something on his social media 3 months ahead of time.
I think they have to go back, Scott, and go through some of these looking for the red flag. Like,
but you do.
Yeah,
you
they
do,
have to.
But it's much easier to see in hindsight, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But some of them, there really isn't. There wasn't a lot of interaction before, or there wasn't anything that, like you said, it was just trying to see kills, that kind of stuff. There wasn't anything. And sometimes it stews over time. You might get your order, but then one person will stew on it to that. I can't have you, nobody else will, kid. So it's a stew, becomes something and then turns into something with a stew on it.
And that's one of the sort of grim ironies of those orders is that sometimes the orders can create violence.
Yeah, so you don't have to. The laws are going to change, and so that the aggrieved at this stage can particularly say they don't want an order, and sometimes they don't, and that is because that's what keeps them alive.
Yeah.
But I mean, the law will change, and then the police will just have to, and so be it. But at the moment, that can be what keeps the aggrieved alive because they haven't got that piece of paper. But as we always say, the piece of paper does not stop you being killed. A piece of paper waving it does not stop him shooting you or stabbing you or whatever. There's other things to that. The piece of paper is only a step in that process.
So what did Winnebago do that's different?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. I watched it. I watched all of those videos this morning because I've been sick. I ended up in the bloody hospital in Mackay.
One of the things that
they swore the witnesses. I remember them doing the witnesses straight up and asking questions and swearing. That's not something we do at all. And I don't think it was closed like us. It was more. They seem to get into it a lot quicker. We seem to, and I'm saying I don't know your state to know, but I do know I've had magistrates say they've gone to watch courts down there and it's open and they're swearing people and asking them questions in an open court. So it's not so private.
What witnesses in a family violence? Usually that's behind closed doors. Who's witnessed it?
Yeah, or in terms of like the court being closed about other people being allowed in or not. Which, we often do with children, things involving children and children being witnesses. And there is different approaches with different types of victim, like victims of sexual assault, victims of domestic violence. Again, the matter is really sort of piecemeal. And another thing I'll just throw in there while we're talking about Australia is people move around from state to state. People can, harass people across state borders. And this is one of the problems of our federal system is you've got different laws in every different state. That's going to make things more complex as well.
The orders are all maybe a long time ago you had to then register your order in a state, in the other state you moved to, or you had to you got a new order in that state. Now that they're recognised across everywhere, so you don't have to. You have one in New South Wales and you come to Queensland, you don't have to register it in Queensland unless it's an older one. You don't have to register in Queensland; it still applies. You can breach an interstate order now.
You would have thought that would have been the first thing they thought of at the time, but I know
Yeah.
how these things happen with law reform. They just don't think about things like that.
And they've got to get every state to agree, I suppose.
They do. They
And you
do.
have to have a
What if
system.
someone changes their name or just misspells their name and then, oh, look, that's not me.
That is a big issue with people who don't know people's. Honestly, you can be in a relationship and not know how to spell someone's name, or you only know them by a nickname or something. So there's a lot of whatever. Police have abilities to check, I suppose, but a lot of people, I say all the time, a lot of orders don't necessarily. If you're searching somebody, it's very hard because people don't necessarily know how to spell. Sounds stupid. Spell people's names, or
No, it
know
makes
what their
complete
full
sense.
names are, or only know them by, you might be Scotty to everybody. No one calls you Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And so when someone took an auto against you, they call you Scotty because that's as they know you of you. Or you could be John Brown,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't necessarily even know their dates of birth or their years. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I think this is like, I mean, I don't want to be an apologist for police because there are plenty of situations where the police do let the side down completely. Particularly when you get stuff behind the scenes where you get like emails from police to police with their attitudes to domestic violence. And it's like, you guys are putting this in your work emails? Like, oh, anyway. But also people have this, I think, a very unrealistic view of the effectiveness of policing from TV shows, where they go, "Oh, look, this guy's breached the domestic violence order. We'll just look up his DNA on the computer, and we'll use a projective algorithm, and we'll find that he's likely to strike here and now, and we'll charge in at the last dramatic minute and not kick the door in with our guns out." And it's like, it is so far from the way in which actual policing works that you don't have the good guys coming in and kicking the door in and saving you. The police don't have that amount of surveillance. And in fact, if they did have that amount of surveillance over people, you'd be kind of worried.
I've got a friend in America and there's a lot of mental health issues that he needs to deal with, and he can ring the police for that. I'm like, we don't ring the police for that. He's like, I just ring the sheriff, they'll come deal with it. I'm like, that's not the police job, but apparently it is in America.
Or someplace in America, there's like 1,300 or something different law enforcement organizations in America. They're all different.
Didn't we do something, I don't know, in one of the previous subjects, or whether this is something I've watched somewhere, where if they're called out, a lot of times they take a mental health nurse with them and stuff like that. There's some things that you're called out to these situations. I think their mental health, they take and I've seen that, whether it was in one of my other classes on a video or whether it was in another country or whatever, they have them with the police and then they take them out and stuff with them. They think might be mental health. They have a professional mental health person come out and stuff.
I mean, I was going to say that would be ideal, but like
Yeah.
it could also not work very well at all.
No.
But it would be an interesting thing to look at, for lots of reasons, and one of which is that police don't have necessarily good empathy or experience with mental health issues, and can just react in and again, not necessarily their fault because they don't have any training, they don't have exposure. I mean, look at the guy who tasered the 95-year-old woman. Clearly freaked out because she had a knife and reacted in a way that was completely inappropriate. Um, but I don't think it was deliberate. I don't think
I
he
would have thought, my thoughts were that with it, surely the home has something. The home's called the police because it got a knife. They know
Yeah,
you got dementia. You think they'd have something in place that you don't have to keep calling the police, because I'm sure that's not a one-off experience.
no.
That the home would have some other things in place. So they just, to me, before you call the police.
Well, it might be like a thing that she did all the time, and
Yep.
someone, it was just like the last straw. They said, "Right, I'm sick of doing this. I'm going to call the police this
Yeah,
time." And it
true.
was like,
Yeah.
"Oh
She
no,
was also,
that was the wrong call."
she was
Um,
95 with a walker.
yeah,
Mm,
Like she's not fast moving. She would have been very, very slow. Wouldn't it
yeah.
have just been easy enough to distract her and be like, thank you, I'll take that.
That's what I thought, but I don't know the whole story. I just thought that to me, it was a reaction, call the police to come in.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe
Yeah,
that's what they do.
you would have thought there would be nurses who would have been able to deal.
Yeah, yeah, or whatever, because it's not, I'm sure it's not uncommon to have, people with dementia having those sort of issues where they get some violent, thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, good.
Just
I think we all call the police for everything. It's like the police, you're talking about mental health. They come, they get called out, they go to their mental health, they take them to the hospital, and the hospital releases them and they're back out, and then they get called out. And I know that they say it's a never ending circle because
yeah.
they know they've got issues, but the hospital, then you do that part of it, but it doesn't go anywhere from there.
Well, particularly if you're dealing with like no public health system. There is that question of like, well, do they have health insurance? No, they don't have health insurance. Well, there's this we kick them straight out of the hospital straight away because they can't afford to pay for their care.
I find that pretty wild. I got sick coming home the other day. That's ended up in Mackay, in the Mater in Mackay, but it cost me $295 to go to Mater Emergency, and I got admitted, obviously. But to Mater Emergency, I'm thinking, because I didn't want to obviously go anywhere else and sit for hours. And so I'm like, how would you be if you couldn't afford the $295 or something like that it was to see a doctor within a period of time? And then I still have blood tests and x-rays that I'm still out of pocket for. But, for a lot of people, I thought, that's a lot of money to outlay. You don't get anything back on it. It's just an outlay in order to not jump the queue, but when you're sick and you want to see someone and rather than going sitting at the base.
Yeah, and like in America, it's not unknown for people to get like $30,000 for a quick trip to the hospital, like a year's salary, depending on the way they get treated and the number of tests and things and everything that goes on. And people just lose all their income, just for a necessary trip to the hospital. So yeah, mental health becomes very, very complicated. And if it's like there's emergency situations and there's a whole lot of people having episodes, and the person that the police have brought in is just someone who's been standing around looking at people weirdly and staring or something and creeping people out, they can just go, oh, this person's less priority than everyone else. So yeah, there's a whole lot of systemic issues that tie into this. One of the things that I thought was most interesting about the Winnebago court was the amount of effort they put into scheduling people and to making sure that people don't overlap and don't bump into each other going in and out of the courts. I thought that was really interesting.
We have the safe rooms. Do you mean like over here we have the safe? Well, in Queensland we have as best we can, considering that some courthouses are not meant, which is why these new specialist courts are being built with all that stuff in mind. But they have them, but it doesn't mean that you understand. You get what I mean? Like the old courts, like some things just aren't set up to be that age. But we have like the safe rooms where they can go and you can meet them and be taken in and stuff. But
I was quite confronted when I was doing work experience as a young lawyer, the old Supreme Court in Queensland, and I was helping out a prosecutor on a murder trial, and the seating area outside had all the had the witnesses. Had the witnesses. It had the family of the victim and the family of the offender all sitting in the same area. It's like, surely this is not good. I was like, that's what we got, what we do.
Yeah, that's the town
That's right.
up here.
I was going to say, that's right.
One side, sitting on the other side. We do have a safe room, but the last time I was in there with a friend, she was like, I wonder when my court proceeding is. And we went and found someone, and they're like, oh no, that matter's already been heard. So she didn't even get called in for her matter.
This is where like there's this whole level. I mean, it's the same with hospitals. And there's a design firm called Portable in Melbourne who's done a lot of work with the courts, with just redesigning the physical spaces around the courts.
We're having the DV live list. There's some like Southport, and they have a DV live list for that sort of stuff. But you have to be, it's a pilot thing, but you have to be a bigger court for that. Exactly what Stephanie is talking about.
Yeah.
But I mean, they do a large amount of them. So for those sorts of things and stuff. But I know what she's saying about people. If you don't have good DV service, checking and whatever. But yeah, there are some things too. Yeah. Anyway, you can Google the DV live list.
Cool. Shall we have a break and come back to the mental health courts, or
I'm happy to keep going.
because I think
Depends on Stephanie.
because I think we're dealing with the same issues almost in both these cases. So the other case study we had this week was the Canadian one, I think. Yes, Canada's mental health courts.
Yeah, I watched that. Was that video too? And I watched it and I found that a little bit interesting because it's very different from ours. Like listening to the people who had successfully completed it. There was a woman and a man and whatever, and they were talking about it. And she was saying how she on the streets and whatever. I thought that was interesting because they seem to be a lot different. Our mental health court's more if you want to be found to be unfit or unsound to stand trial or stuff like that. You know what I mean?
And there's definitely an overlap between drug and alcohol. Like the idea of having like a drug court and a mental health court. What they were doing did seem to be a lot of drug and addiction stuff as well. Because there's no firm dividing line between those issues. So you could end up with a situation where you have like two innovative courts working against each other because someone's trying to do the mental health stuff, someone's trying to do the drug and alcohol stuff. And I guess the more specialist courts you've got, the more likelihood you've got of overlap. You've got like First Nations people's courts, even what we've just been looking at in terms of domestic violence courts. How many times are there mental health issues, drug, alcohol issues, Indigenous people involved with those?
Do you have to have a diagnosis already to go to a mental health court? Because there are so many people undiagnosed.
Yeah. I don't know that you have to have a diagnosis, do you?
No, we don't sort of have like, that's what I'm trying to say. In Queensland, it's a little bit different. Your mental health court's a different kind of thing. You don't have a particular mental health. You have the ones where you can go and get, assistance, not in places like where I live, but in the bigger courts, they have the ones like your Murray Court, and you have, it used to be called DAR, that you can go and they help people like have, with your issues and stuff like that, which is your mental health and all that plays into it. But it's not a standalone. To me, the mental health court standalone is the one where you go in the High Court to be found to be fit to stand trial.
Yeah. And that's like a mental health assessment.
Yeah.
The Canadian one looked very much, from what we saw, as the diversionary court, where if someone's got problems, you sent them to this court, and if they satisfactorily, like they attend and they contribute and they're satisfactory, they might have a reduced sentence.
That's right. We don't have that.
Yeah.
You might get out if you got put on probation or something in Queensland. You can, you have to undertake any programs that they tell you to undertake and stuff like that. So in that case, they could put you off to some, programs for your mental health and stuff like that. But there's no actual set diversion.
Yeah. And it'd be, I would imagine, a standard kind of like a suspended sentence, where it's like if you go and do all your classes and your therapy and everything else, we'll suspend the sentence. But if you stop going, we'll reinstate it.
No. It's part of your probation. If you don't do what they say, they breach you. That's it. There's no, let's put it off while you go and do that and come back.
Yeah.
I think we seem to be very different in Queensland from what I see watching your videos on a lot of this stuff. We're not so diversionary. We're not so rehabilitation, as in part of the court can be afterwards, but not as the ongoing process to the end.
The thing that I guess that came through both of those scenarios is one of the important things is having everyone, including the prosecutors in these courts, trained to understand the issues. And that's something that's very hard to make any leeway with in standard courts, because judges are very resistant to judicial education. They very much believe, and you don't have any specific qualification to be a judge. You're just someone who is appointed by the government to be a judge. Usually there's someone who's an experienced barrister who spent a lot of time in court, but not always. They recently appointed a law professor from Monash to not recently, this is before the plague. I keep saying recently, it must be like 10 years ago now. They appointed a Monash law professor, and the profession was just outraged that this was someone who hadn't worked as a lawyer in court, that they could be a judge. And it was like, well, she probably knows a lot more about the process and the critiques and what needs to be done than any of you guys. Because you can be a lawyer who spends all your time just doing commercial negotiations, and then you get appointed to be a judge, and the next Monday you're sitting there as a judge in criminal matters, hearing like sexual violence cases and things that you've got no experience of, that you've never even looked at since you were at law school and did criminal law, 30 years ago. And there are regularly calls that people say, okay, we probably need a course of judicial education. The judges need to learn stuff about being a judge, but the judges won't do it.
And that's very right, because some have a planning and environment background and stuff like that, and then have to go into criminal. Yeah. Same applies for magistrates. They could be civil people, and then they have to do criminal. It's very hard to cross all jurisdictions unless you're somebody in a little firm that maybe does everything.
But then there's going to be things that you don't ever do as well that come up as unusual cases, and a good judge will inquire and find out more about, if they suddenly find they're sitting in cases involving domestic violence, a good judge will do a little bit of research around causes of domestic violence, but they don't all do that. Quite often they'll just send their associate, or if they even consider it, and often they'll say, I'm a judge, it's not my role to know anything about facts or things. I just rule on what the law is. It's none of this factual stuff's anything to do with me. That's just what the jury deals with. But sometimes I'll have an associate who'll be influential. Like the Mabo decision, a lot of it seems to have hinged on one of the judge's associates actually being organized and teaching her judge about First Nations issues. And that totally changed that judge's opinion. And then he was influential on the other judges, and it sort of got the ball rolling. So judges' associates sometimes have this role. But what I'm getting back to, I guess, is when you're talking about mental illness and any of these specialist issues, there's no reason to suspect that judges know anything more than a person on the street about these issues. And there's even less pressure for people like prosecutors. Because prosecutors often get rewarded just for their success rates and whatever else. And there's no incentive for a prosecutor to go, you know what, it's going to be better if we negotiate a solution that stops this person offending in the future. Because all they're being judged on is the number of people. Particularly in the US, we have elected prosecutors. So they're wanting to show they're tough on crime, a lot of high conviction rates. So the Canadian approach any of the specialist courts approach, where you're actually training people to understand what mental illness is, what are the issues for First Nations people, what are the issues surrounding domestic violence, is I think one of the more powerful parts of those reforms. I had a friend of mine went to the bar after we graduated, and he had a judge throw a book at him for suggesting that he was saying it was an Indigenous offender, relatively minor offence, and he said that it was alcohol, and was trying to raise this idea about the problems of alcoholism in the Indigenous communities, and the judge literally threw a book at him, big heavy law book, and said, and I quote, "My God, man, they ate the Chinese." And this was the Chief Justice, Peter Connolly. a man they couldn't get to retire, so they eventually created a new appeal court to circumvent him. So the man was a known menace, but we still were in a situation where, and this is the olden times. This is the mid-90s, but it's not that long ago. And you had a judge that not only would say things that are outrageous to the point of being deranged, like that. I mean, it's a bit of a Donald Trump statement, that one. But like there was no pressure, no encouragement, whatever, to actually learn anything about the links, the problems of alcoholism in the First Nations community. It just simply wasn't part of what he did. So yeah, that was what I took away from the video, was that both those videos was that specialist training, I think, would probably do a lot more good than a whole lot of procedural changes. Particularly if you can change the incentive and outcomes for people.
Matisse was saying last week that when she worked in the prison system, there was one gentleman in there. He was simply in there because they had given him so many chances to change his behavior, and because he is mentally ill or retarded for the medical terminology, he couldn't. And so because he'd had one too many chances, he's now in jail, and that's not the place for him.
But then you've got the what is the solution problem? And often the criminal justice system just ends up being the big bin bag, where anything that we don't have any other problems in society that we can't fix, people just end up in the criminal justice system. Health system, education system, anything that does not work, and eventually we'll just sort of sift them all down into the criminal justice system. And it is easy to characterize the system as being bad and corrupt, and everyone who works in it being a terrible person, including you, Robin. But at the end of the day, there are so many no-win situations that, like, people end up there because they've lost all their last chances. And there's also the effect of, I don't know if you guys did it in psychology, totalizing institutions. Alvin, someone was a big, I think in the 60s and 70s, it was a study of the way in which institutionalization changes people and how people become dependent on being institutionalized. And you see people sort of flipping back and forth between things like the army, the mental health sanitarium system, prisons, and organizations where you don't have to exercise choices, where you find that if you can just end up back in one of these systems where someone looks after you and you get your food every day, you can end up just totally institutionalized, regardless of what institution it is.
So that's like a lot of defendants want to go back to jail, like to go back, or commit crimes to go back to to prison, because they've got a roof over their head, they've got 3 meals a day, they've got TV, they've got warmth, cold, whatever you want to do. So I know how people will tell me some places up north, some of them, when it comes to winter, commit offences and they go to prison because it's warm and going to be on, they've got somewhere to be, and they're not out in the freezing cold.
Yeah, well, there's a whole psychology. It's I can't remember who was the theorist, but it's called totalizing institutions.
Yeah, because it's very hard for them on the outside. I've known plenty of ones that come out really good. Drugs done really well in there, and then fall back in the same pattern. Because how do they? Here you go, put you on a bus, goodbye, sort of thing. Put you up with Centrelink, but then how do you get a house? How do you get a job? How do you the money? Like it doesn't continue on to me afterwards, even if you're on parole or if you've done your full time, you're not. But you know what I mean? Like there's not the support for them after they get out and they fall back into the same friends and the same patterns and the same habits, and that's why no one, I'm never going to succeed. I remember getting told that if you stood on a table and you would and someone was below you, right, and to pull you down, so to pull you back down to the life you were before is easier, like to pull that person down, for that person on the table to pull you out
of
what you're into make the choice. It's easier to pull that person down and go back, sort of thing. It's hard to pull yourself out of stuff. Is the gist of that.
I think that's why a lot of people, and I guess I'm in that camp as well, like, look, juvenile offence is an early intervention, because at least you can have a chance of feeling that maybe some of the people are going to be able to get out. But once people are like later in life, it seems so difficult. Again, another story from a friend in law school. She was an associate on a trial of a priest who was a sex offender, and it was Catholic Church, and that's relevant not just because the Catholic Church, but he was someone who came from a totalizing institution. He didn't have to cook his meals. He didn't have to exist in the world at all because nuns did everything for him. And when they convicted him, he literally like had a cardboard box that was all his belongings. All the stuff that he owned in the world was like in one box, and off he went to prison to be processed with his box of belongings. And he was definitely a dangerous person who did some terrible things to people, but he just had no idea about the world. Suspect he's probably still there, and it's probably some ways it's the right place for him. It's never going to reform him, but his chances of like coping with the world, when he spent all his life not making kind of adulting decisions, is not very likely. So anyway, I mean, it's all very depressing when we look at those long term.
That's why people go in and out of prison, as you say, Scott, because that's a life they know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't worry them to go back there because it's not, you get looked after in a roundabout kind of way, but it's better than being on the streets. It's better than couch surfing. It's better than what's out there. At least somebody's telling you what to do. You've got to get up. You've got to go have your meals. You've got to, you've got somebody guiding you each day. You don't have to make, as you said, your own decisions so much.
I reviewed an article recently on women's prisons in the US. And it was just talking about how horrible the halfway house experience for women in, I think it was Colorado or something where it was more progressive, and how they'd be put into these halfway houses and put into jobs, very inadequate, non-paying jobs for the people who owned the halfway houses. And then they were subject to coercive control from the people who owned the halfway houses, who were told, if you don't have sex with us, we'll infringe you and put you back into prison. And quite a few women were like, right, I'm going back into prison. At least I'm safer in the prison. So,
see, there's so many reasons why people choose prisons. That's what I say. Each case is individual as to why, same as kids, why they choose to rather be in prison than at home. There's reasons for each person, individual reason why that is better than
maybe we need some kind of benevolent institution that looks after people who need looking after, regardless of why they need looking after. They don't have to take on the stigma of prisoner or mental health or anything. If they need looking after, that they get looked after. It's I know that sounds like a dangerously subversive idea.
But a lot of them will either have, we were talking about before, mental health issues, learning difficulties. They're all very common in
a lot of
okay,
Stephanie, I think we're wrapping up because there's not a huge amount to cover in these ones.
It was interesting that this week, because your videos weren't like Australian, so I found that you did the DV court over there where you did the jury. There was a jury video, and I'm like, we have a Queensland jury video. I just noticed that a lot of the stuff you used weren't Australian. So to me, it was interesting because it's overseas. It was very different from.
Yeah, these are masses. No,
he didn't use Australian sort of content.
Yeah, I don't know whether he didn't have access to the Australian, or no one's done good videos on the Australian stuff. But yeah, I'm kind of working with his notes on this. I'd like to end with something positive. Like I wish I had a video on the place that's using prisoners with racehorses to fix racehorses with PTSD, because that's actually a nice story.
In Australia.
Yeah,
Okay.
somewhere in New South Wales, because I didn't even know that a lot of racehorses get PTSD because they're raced way too young, uh, and they're incredibly highly strung. Um,
Oh, sorry.
so
I'm
they've
not
been
laughing at you. I'm
they've
laughing
been
at my mum because she's got racehorses and she's
they
got a 2-year-old getting ready to race.
so they match up prisoners with PTSD
Okay.
with PTSD, and it makes you cry. When I saw the presentation on it, I wish there was a video. It just makes you cry because there's these damaged men helping these damaged horses, and it's so beautiful.
Well, that's those things are really good. Those rehabilitate. I think there's needs to be more of those. Well, as you know,
Yeah,
I keep saying there needs to be more diversion and rehabilitation because that's a great example of putting two opposite things together to
and
make
just
it work. Yeah.
yeah, and people who've never had any love or any attention or the opportunity to show love for anything else, suddenly being in a position where they're responsible for another living being who responds to them. It's just yeah,
A
um,
bit like army people, you get surprised how many people who've discharged from the army that end up in courts with the PTSD and
yeah.
making choices and stuff like that, when
Yeah, and,
they've,
and you get people a bit. I know in the States there's not just prisoners working with dogs, but veterans with PTSD working with dogs too. Um, so often animal therapy seems to be one of the few things that work.
yeah, and I think they're great. I don't know. I think, they're great. A lot of the issues, if you plug them down as similar issues in people, and it's finding that right thing to help them to rehabilitate. We're never going to do that for everybody. Some
No,
people are just going to spend their lives in and out of prison.
yeah,
But for some people like war veterans and stuff like that, I always think there must be a better way than they've turned to drugs and done all this stuff and end up in prison and doing those things because of what happened to them. We owe them a gratitude. I know some magistrates that'll say, thank you for your service to them and stuff like that. There could be some, yeah, to me that,
that's really troubling to me. Like I'm not a big sort of nationalist pro-army sort of person, but I get really upset when I see people like and our veterans as well that
yes,
come out of the army so damaged and
yeah,
so without anyone caring for them. Um,
because everything's broke down after they've come out. You see it on TV, and I've seen it. The family, the whole thing breaks down. That's the PTSD. But
yeah,
I find them one of the saddest ones, and I've only seen a few in my time. But it's to me that's some of the saddest ones because that what they've seen is something we'll never ever understand. Like
yeah,
they can't cope in the real world.
yeah. And we spend all our time, waving the flag at Anzac Day and saying, blah blah blah. But if it actually comes to dealing with an actual person with an actual problem, it's a different matter half the time.
So there's all that stuff. Anyway, it's everyone's different. As I said, everyone has
Yeah.
they're very similar issues behind it all, but there's different reasons why everyone's ended up there and how those issues come about and how they've dealt with the issues and
Yeah.
things like that. It can be as simple as people. It surprised me as people losing a baby and things like that. That can set off a mechanism of triggers.
And at the end of the day, there's that question, and it was raised in one of the videos, is like, is our problem solving specialist course the answer, or should we be just trying to fix the courts?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. That's really good. You're still recording, so I don't want to say too much. It's recording.
It's okay. We're wrapping up now.
Yeah. But
Um,
yes, I'm right. The courts building this is what I keep my personal opinion is building more prisons can't be the answer to everything.
no, no, and we're seeing yeah, all the this is kind of like the end of all the stuff that you've been studying criminology. We get to this kind of end point of all the hopeless cases that hopefully if we fix the system earlier on, we don't end up with this backlog of hopeless cases. And hopefully, there's still hope for some people that are in the hopeless case box. We just have to keep giving them a chance. And
I know that there's big issues, and I've seen this in the other subjects we've done with, older people in prison and just so many people that we are paying for and looking after, and they're never going to be able to do much with their life, but they're older and they've got so much health issues. So we've got that older, generation in prison that aren't going to go anywhere. But they health issues, so that burden on society, or not that they're burdened, but the tax, the money, whatever, with these people in prison. So we have a remember that was in part of one of these criminology subjects I read about and found that very interesting. I hadn't really thought about the people in there.
I guess if you have a major medical emergency when you're in prison, you hopefully don't have to wait 4 hours for an ambulance.
No, no, but I mean, I guess if you've got a heart or diabetes, or and you're never going to come out, then there's all these people that are languishing, sorry, is in prison who are never going to come out but got health issues. So that's, I guess it's the cost. Like, what do you do? Leave them? You know what I mean? It's a thing, because they're not meant to come out or whatever. I mean, how many times do you turn on TV and see that? I know some notorious person's died in prison, or so I remember reading that in one of the things, Scott, and it might have been one of the subjects I'd done with you earlier, and I found that very interesting. I never thought about the people that have to go and do life. Not that life is life, but that die in prison or spend their elderly years in prison.
Yeah. Well, this has been a bit of a depressing day.
No, it's quite interesting. I find it
interesting
that there's so many different ways that they try to solve the problem and do it, but whether the statistics actually show they actually succeed, is the issue. But anyway,
okay, guys,
it was an interesting week. Yeah,
it's a short one today, and we've got the last one next week. We're talking at community policing, and we'll catch you guys then.
So then, what do we have next week? Is week 11, and then we've got the break week, the week 12. Do we not have anything week 12?
Not unless you guys want to do something.
Yep. Did I miss anything on Friday's one for our other subject?
It was a bit of an interesting discussion, but it's recorded and it's all up.
Okay.
It was just me and Steph. So.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
That's all right. I understand.
Okay.
Okay. See you later.
Thank you, Scott. See